Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're going to be looking at Gott des Himmels und der Erden, which translates to God who madest earth and heaven. Pretty straightforward chorale. A couple of places where I wasn't 100% sure how the analysis should be written down, but I'll provide some varying outlooks to try and make sense of the harmonies that are going on. So we pretty much stay in the key of A major for the entire chorale. We start on an A major triad, we end on an A major triad. I think it's safe to say that we are in the key of A major. We then proceed to E major over G sharp. So in the key of A major, that's a 5-6 chord. And then we immediately go to kind of like a deceptive progression, or not kinda, it is a deceptive progression, right? We would expect 5-6 to go back to 1, but the bass continues downwards. So this is just a root position F sharp minor triad or a 6 chord. We have some passing tones in the soprano and the tenor. And then we have a 1-6 chord, an A major over C sharp, C sharp, C sharp, A and E. And also kind of doubled the way that I would expect as well. We have some passing tones, or just some non-chord tones in general, in the lower of the three voices. And then we have C sharp, E, G, and A. This is kind of interesting. This G suspension kind of complicates the texture a little bit, as I kind of heard this as another tonic chord happening, but this suspended seventh over the bass, this suspended fifth over the bass, gets interrupted when the chord quality changes on the next beat. So this is another A major triad over C sharp. I guess it could be technically called an A major 7 over C sharp, but the suspension happens before and I don't really hear it as a 7th chord. And then we have D sharp, B, and F sharp, and A. We could say, even though these are non-chord tones to the previous chord, there is sort of a 5-6-5 of 5 going on, as B is the dominant to E major, which is our dominant. And on the next beat, we have an E major chord, as we would expect, because we're getting ready for a half cadence in the key of A major here. Now, when Bach introduced secondary leading tones, so in this case D sharp, which is implying E major as opposed to A major, when he applies when he uses them in the context of a cadence, it's hard to tell whether or not he's modulated. To me, it sounds like a half cadence because the melody sounds very A major focused, but Bach's harmonization does tinker with the context a little bit. Because if we analyze the rest of this cadence, we have just another B major triad, which is 5 of 5 going to 5. And remember, 5 of 5 really is just a substitution of 2. It's just taking the 2 chord in the key and turning it into major. But doing that brings a lot of focus to the chord that it's tonicizing. But just playing devil's advocate here, say for example we did modulate to the key of E, around this D sharp area, we would have a 5-6-5 chord going to 1, going to 5 of 5, just going to 5 regular, going to 1. So this is what that would look like in the key of E major. I wasn't 100% sure. I think that, to me, it sounds more so on the A major side, but when we get the D sharps introduced, it does make it sound more towards the E major side while staying in the realm of A major, if that makes sense. Okay, moving on to the next phrase, we have a B minor triad immediately after hearing B major in our ears, so that's what makes me feel like we're in the key of A major, is because we don't continue to see the D sharps after the fact. But we just have a root position 2 chord, B minor triad, some passing tones in the inner voices. We then have B, B, D, and G sharp. That is a G sharp diminished chord over B, which is a 7-6. And then this E right here, if we listen to this E and this D happening at the same time, now this D is a chord tone, but I guess we technically could call this 5-4-2, because there's kind of like an E going on, but it really, 7 is already dominant enough, right? We would expect it to go to 1, which it does, right? It goes to 1-6. We usually expect 7-6 to go to 1, but it goes to 1-6 in this case, which is kind of interesting. And I think it does that because of this D that gets placed in the bass. We have a passing tone in the bass as well. And then we have an accented non-chord tone here, which kind of obscures the chord, but really what's happening here is G sharp, E, E, and B. It's just a 5-6 chord, just an E major triad over G sharp. And then we have A, E, and C sharp. We expect 5-6 chords to go to 1, sorry, not to 1-6, but to 1 in root position. And then here we have some passing tones and other non-chord tones. This would just be a root position D major triad, so just a 4 chord. And then we would get E, we have a 4-3 suspension in the tenor, but it's basically just a big 5 chord before we go to 1 in a perfect authentic cadence. So far we've pretty much stayed in the realm of A major. Maybe there's an argument to be made that there was a modulation to E, but it was the cadence definitely sounded more like a half cadence to me, because I'm always listening to the melody. The melody always just stands out the most. I mean, that's just the way that we hear things. We hear the outer voices more so than we do the inner voices. And the way that I program the chorales, like in my DAW, I do so that all of the voices get somewhat of an equal footing, so that you can hear the inner voices moving, so that you can pay more attention to the quality of the chord and not have it be so bass and melody focused, because these chorales do really interesting things, and some of the modulations are more nuanced than others that are just definitive, but it does not feel like we've modulated so far, even though there are some sections that did sound a little bit less stable in the key of A major. So if we move forward, we are getting ready for our next cadence, which is right here, which is another half cadence in the key of A major, but really it's just this half cadence. I mean, it really could be an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of E, because look how far ahead we get D sharps. That being said, it just doesn't fully sound. It just doesn't sound like an authentic cadence to me. It sounds like a half cadence, and maybe that's subjective. I don't know, but the use of D sharps throughout definitely makes it harder to analyze. So we have another 1 chord. I'll go ahead and analyze it again because we're on a new system. Passing 7th in the bass. And then we have F sharp, D sharp, A, and C. Now D sharp is the leading tone to E, which is our dominant. So we're going to call that a 7 fully diminished in first inversion of 5. And then we get a 5-6 chord afterwards, right? It's just E major over G sharp, E, E, B. And then we have some passing tones, just some otherwise non-chord tones, but we get D natural immediately afterwards. So walking that back makes me feel like this D sharp was just expressive. But then we get E, C sharp, G, and C sharp. That is a C sharp minor triad, so a 3 chord in first inversion. So that C sharp is interesting. If that was an A in the melody, that would, it's sort of like a deceptive progression. When 5 goes to something other, when 5 goes to a tonic functioning chord other than the tonic, right? So if it goes to 3 or 6, it has a tricked you feel to it. So it's another deceptive progression, just like how we saw at the beginning. But then afterwards we get F sharp, A, F sharp, and D. Goes to 4, 6, right? It's just a D major triad in first inversion. And then we have some passing tones in the lower voices. And then we have A, C sharp, E, and C sharp, just a root position A major triad with some material, some non-chord tones and the on the end of that beat. I guess we technically could say that that is a D7 chord over A, which would make sense because we're getting ready to go to 5. on this beat. So we could call that 5, 4, 2 of 5, right? Because D7 over A is third inversion. And then we go to 5, and then we get the neighbor tones in the upper voices as embellishment. So then we get, we're getting ready for a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major, right? We don't really modulate too much. Like, we kind of flirt with the idea of E major, but it doesn't quite sound like we've modulated, right? So sorry about that. My camera gave me an error telling me I was running low on space, but we're continuing into the next section where we get a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So we have E, A sharp, C sharp, and F sharp. That is an F sharp 7 chord over E. So that would be a 5, 4, 2 of 2, because it is the dominant of B, and B is the supertonic in the key of A major. And on this beat, we get a very brief 2 chord. Oh, sorry, I put the wrong thing in parentheses. There's nothing parenthetical about that. What is parenthetical is the 2 that happens on or the 2/6 rather, that happens on the weak beat. And that goes to C sharp, D, E, or sorry, C sharp, B, E, and G. So that goes to a 3 chord, or a 3/7 chord even, in root position. But, I mean, depending on how you look at it, if this C sharp is an accented non-chord tone, we have B, B, E, and G. So there's kind of like a 5, 6, 4 going on, depending on how you look at it. This 6/4 would be kind of a harder thing to sell, because 6/4 chords up until this point have been used very infrequently. And when we do see them in mostly cadential situations, and the other times we see them as if they're part of a passing figure. I haven't seen too many, in fact, I'm not even sure if I've seen a single pedal 6/4 in my analysis so far. So that'd be interesting to point out when we see it. But this is not part of a passing figure, because the B would be the bass if we analyzed it the way the chord would be in the parentheses. So that would be interesting if that's what was being implied. However, 2 going to 3 is kind of like 2 going to 5. It's just there's no, the 5 and the 7 both aren't present in the 3 chord. Or actually, no, they are. It's just we don't have, the way the chord is spelled doesn't give it the trajectory of 1 right away. But anywho, we get C sharp, A, E, and A. Actually immediately goes to a 1 chord in first inversion, before we go to D, or F sharp, A, D, and A. There's kind of like a, even though these are non-chord tones, there's kind of like a 4 chord going on here, which would make sense, because that would want to go to E, A, F sharp, and D. Actually, I think what's happening here is this is just 5/3 of the previous chord. That's what's happening. This E is just a accented non-chord tone. It's just counterpoint that's going on right now. The thing with contrapuntal music is that when it gets contrapuntal, it gets increasingly more difficult to focus on the exact chords that are happening. So that's why I picked the chorales, because for the most part they are vertically conceived, and the harmonic rhythm happens on beats. Like, you're harmonizing the melody, which makes it easier to analyze, as opposed to trying to analyze something with more of an elaborate texture. But when it gets contrapuntal, that's when you gotta kind of put the critical thinking cap on. Passing tone actually no, just kidding, that's the chord tone in the bass. And then we have E, A, E, and C sharp. We have this really interesting double ornamented figure here, because there's a 4/3 suspension in the bass, but this B going to G sharp right here turns it into a 5 chord. Even though we have C sharp as well, we have like this double figure going on. They mirror each other, but it's really just a big 5 chord, and we get some 7ths in there as well, but really they don't happen on the strong beat, so I analyze them as non-chord tones. And then we get 1, with that same neighbor tone thing that we saw in the last cadence, I believe, but this time in 3 of the voices rather than 2, like right here. So all in all, an interesting chorale. Again, I still need to continue to meditate on, when is it important to analyze chords that occur on ands, so like in between the harmonic rhythm. I think that I'm pretty decent at it, but sometimes it can get a little overbearing. Usually it's when you see chords that are adjacent to one another, like 2 going to 3, or like 3 going to 4. When you see chords that are adjacent to one another, or if you see a progression that you wouldn't expect, that's usually when there's a chord that's kind of hiding in the texture. But all in all, it's really not the end of the world if it slips through the cracks. I just don't want to analyze every 8th note and sort of force a label onto it when there isn't really one that needs to be there. But that being said, it was interesting to see a chorale that didn't modulate. It pretty much stayed in the realm of A major the entire time, even though there were sections where E was definitely the theme. It never really left the key of A major. Like, the melody was always diatonic, and the harmony was pretty much it was entirely in the key of A major. I'm almost 100% certain. So that's fascinating. I can't recall if we've looked at a chorale up to this point that hasn't modulated. Some of the modal ones, they fluidly go between the major and the minor, but that's a different thing. But yeah, there have been some non-interesting harmonic, sort of like some modulation schemes, but this one, the fact that there isn't one, is kind of equally interesting in a way, even though it didn't lend itself to the most interesting analysis. But that being said, I will leave you all on that note. Thank you so much for watching the video, and thank you for your continued support of the channel. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.